pleasure to be here. My name is Alexei Koulakov. I work at Cold Spring Harbor Lab. Cold Spring Harbor, as you may know, just across the bay from here, is a research institution that studies cancer, molecular biology, genomics, quantitative biology, and neuroscience, and plant biology. So I'm the one who is in the neuroscience department. I am an applied mathematician and theoretical physicist by training. I got some background in neuroscience later in my life. I believe that, DNA invented brain. So some people say that DNA invented brain so it can understand itself. So I believe that the brain invented math so it can understand itself. So that's why I'm very excited about this. So my interests are in interaction between artificial intelligence and neuroscience. So there is this new program at Cold Spring Harbor which is starting, which is called NeuroAI, where we try to see if we can study brain using the tools of neuroscience, and if we can use whatever we learn from how brain functions applied to AI. That's one of my interests. I'm also interested in brain evolution, and the other things, like one of my hobbies is studying olfaction. So you saw Richard Axel there, who is one of the pioneers in that field, and so Werner Herzog is like one of my favorite directors. I remember in '87, I grew up in the Soviet Union. A lot of those movies started penetrating through the Iron Curtain, mostly in the form of VHS tapes, and so there were some festivals, and I remember Agira, The Wrath of God, and Fitzgeraldo. I'm not sure I don't remember how to pronounce it exactly. It was remarkable. It was mind-blowing to me. So I was around 20 at that time. It was very interesting. So.
Wow. All right, so we'll get things started. People are thinking about some questions, no pun intended. Can we be sure we're actually all here in a movie, that we're actually in a movie theater? 100% sure that we're not?
Well, we're somewhere near the movie theater. I think it's, it's very likely that we are in simulated reality. It's probably more likely than not.
We're all going to be in trouble soon, I think. More seriously, so his vision, his sort of metaphor of the brain being a theater of thought, is that something that resonates with you?
Yeah, absolutely. It's actually, so there are various theories of consciousness, and one of them, so there are two extremes which I try to formulate, and there's a whole swath of theories in between. So one of them is called Cartesian theater. So the idea is that our consciousness, our mind, it's based on the idea of duality, which is formulated by Descartes, right? Therefore Cartesian. So the idea is that our mind is kind of like a homunculus who sits in a theater and watches the kind of reality presented on the screen. And that's where this metaphor is coming from. The interesting anecdote is that at some point when neuroscientists were studying visual system, they discovered that indeed in the brain there are multiple screens. So they're like the information about the world, like my image right now is presented at probably about 10, 15 copies around your visual cortex, as a just image on the screen. So that was like mind-blowing to people to see that there is some kind of, not a confirmation, but I guess at least the, observation in that direction. But then it turned out that the explanation for those screens is quite different from just like that there is a homunculus that watches them. They have to be organized this way anatomically. So there is a better explanation than just the Cartesian theater. So that's one extreme. Another extreme is produced by a philosopher whose name is Daniel Dennett. So he wrote a book, Consciousness Explained. It's probably one of the best books about the subject, according to which he put forward something which is called multiple draft model. So there are like multiple drafts of reality which coexist in our brain. It's kind of like multiple copies of Word document that the team of people edit, and then they eventually converge and they find something which would be, for example, my next sentence that I'm going to say. Right, so that's another extreme. In that case, like consciousness is just an illusion, right? So, you know, and there's all whole things, like range of theories in between. So that's why I think the metaphor, the theater of thought, is coming from that idea.
And what kind of drew you into this universe, into studying neuroscience?
Well, I mean, it's one of the most exciting, I think, fields, you know. I used to be a theoretical physicist, you know, so physicists, they study the universe, and we're kind of already saturated that question because we have to like build really expensive microscopes. Like at CERN, there's an accelerator that costs like billions of dollars to really crack the universe further. But every one of us has this tool in our heads which we can experiment with, and we still have no idea how it works, right? So that's a remarkable question, I think.
Yeah. All right, well, I want to open it up to the audience. Yeah, I knew they wouldn't take long. There's someone right there. Someone's going to come over with a microphone. I know everyone thinks they can yell loud, but take my word for it. There's people here who will be thankful. So.
Do you think the self can be localized in the brain, or is it more of a coordinated effort dispersed across the cortex?
I don't think it can be localized. I mean, actually, since that movie, there were several advances in kind of representing where like our thoughts are. And one of the most interesting ones I find was the ability to read somebody's inner speech using imaging, fMRI imaging, and AI. So somebody learned how to use AI tools to figure out what we're thinking about, like literally to convert it into speech using large language models. And like one of the things that they discovered is that that information is dispersed. So you can have like equally salient representation of the speech in different parts of the brain. So it's most likely that whatever our thoughts or our mind or consciousness is located, it's probably kind of everywhere.
Anybody else want to? Okay, it's right next door. All right. Microphone's coming right there.
Thank you. So I think their names are Penrose and Hameroff. You're a physicist.
Mm-hmm.
It's been maybe a decade or two now, but their ideas about the quantum nature of consciousness and the whole microtubule thing, is that anything that rings a bell? Because I haven't heard about any developments in that in a long time, and maybe I'm not getting it right.
I mean, I think it's a philosophical idea. I don't think there is much involvement of quantum mechanics in how the brain works, simply because the brain is a very messy, noisy device that will destroy any resemblance of quantum mechanics. Of course, like every act of chemical reaction involves quantum mechanics, but they're kind of like different molecules are kind of isolated in terms of like quantum state. So I don't think it's a well accepted idea, although it's very inspirational.
I see someone right there. Do you have your hand up? Okay, good.
I was just curious with the way the mind works. Why is it that frequently, if twins were separated at birth and they've grown up completely differently, that when they're 18 or 20 years old, whatever age it might be, even though they were brought up completely differently, their minds in many ways still think the same way? So the question kind of is how much do we have free thought and how much is it genetic?
Well, there's quite a bit of genetics. I actually have twins, as I have daughter twins, and so one of them is here. So I think there is a lot of I mean, I could tell you stories, but I don't want to be put them on the spot. There is quite a bit of genetics in the way how brains are wired up, and there's of course a lot of learning and experience-dependent, behavior that we have. But like one argument, I guess, is that we have almost the same genome as mice, right? And yet we possess intelligence and they do not. So there must be whatever differentiates our genome from the mouse genome contains the answer to the main question, right? What intelligence is. So that must be imprinted, and there's no way how you train the mouse that they will be able to, do calculus. So it just means that, there is quite a bit. Our intelligence is essentially imprinted in the genome.
Thank you.
Thank you. There's someone all the way in the back, and there's someone all the way in the front, so we're going to bounce back.
So I'm very curious what your definition of consciousness or the mind is, and whether you see the mind as physical or non-physical. That's question number one. And actually, question number two, in my mind, the mind is non-physical. So do you believe that? And are there any theories that define the mind as being an energy rather than a biological entity, physical?
Well, it's a complex question. I don't really know the answer to that question. Like, obviously, I can just speculate. By the way, energy is very physical. So energy is there is virtually, E is equal to mc squared, right? So energy is essentially mass. So whatever my theory is I'm coming to this from the perspective of AI and trying to see how AI can fit into this topic. And I think a good metaphor for it is this idea of hierarchical AI, where you have different hierarchies of processes. I think there is a paper about it by Jeff Hinton and Peter Dayan. I mean, if you're interested, you can read about it. It's called feudal networks, where you have low-level actors, and those low-level, so for example, peasants, and they are controlled by higher-level actors, which would be knights, and then there would be barons, and then there would be further dukes, and so on. And there is a king on top, right? So this is what I think how our brain, at least on the level of software, is built. So we have this very high-level process, and then at the bottom we have muscles. And that high-level process is actually oblivious about the whole hierarchy of processes in between. And therefore it has this appearance, this illusion that it has, some level of control. But in fact, it does control on some level behavior of the peasants, but it cannot find a connection to the, how muscles are moving, right? So that's what I think the consciousness is. It's just the top level of this, computational hierarchy.
This gentleman here. Got the microphone here for you.
So what's the big question your research is focused on, and what has surprised you so far in your pursuit of the answer to that question?
Well, I mean, I'm trying to find a connection between AI systems and neural systems, right? And so far, they are not reconcilable. So the way how engineers design computing systems and the way how nature did it, they were not aware there is a disconnect between them. The only connection is that there's a neural networks. That all the modern AI systems, they're really neural networks, in the same way as our thinking is controlled by neural networks. But a very interesting question is how learning is organized in the brain, and why does it work? Because the way how engineering system organizes learning is completely different from how brain does it. But the way brain does it is very inefficient, and it's not clear how it really will learn new information. How we can, for example, learn a language from only a few examples, whereas GPT systems, the large language models, they have to see essentially the entire corpus of our language to learn it. Obviously, no child reads every book in the universe to learn the language. Whereas that's what literally large language models have to do to learn it. So how is it that brains are so inefficient in learning, and yet they're capable of doing it so fast? That's, I think, is the most fascinating and fundamental question.
I have a 1-year-old grandson. I'm watching him learn how to speak. It's
Yeah.
amazing.
Yeah.
You actually can see how it's
you can watch their facial expressions and the utterances. I guess it's proto-language or something.
Right, so I think like there's a lot of, I agree with Chomsky, so there's this theory of innateness of language, that a lot of aspects of language, such as grammar, or like recurrent structure of language, are already embedded in the brain evolutionary. So we inherit them, and what we do is we just populate it with dictionary, essentially. We're born in some country, which, happens to be this, and then you populate it with English dictionary, but all the rest is already there. So that's why we're so efficient. So a lot of this learning actually happens on the evolutionary time scales.
When it comes to understanding of consciousness and advancements in AI, to AGI and eventually ASI, do you think we need to develop a deep understanding of consciousness before we make those advancements, or are they separate?
Well, I mean, it's a very important question. It's a very important question, and there are like many things that come to my mind, and I'm not sure if I can provide a coherent answer. But I think that at some, like, if I look into the future, what's going to happen? We probably will coexist with AI for quite a while, right? So it will be similar to us living with Neanderthals for like 100,000 years. And I'm not sure who will play the role of Neanderthals, but this is probably because it's very difficult to stop the progress. We cannot really stop development of AI. The only thing we can do is we can kind of tweak it. We can try to control it. So from that perspective, it's better actually to do what is called AI alignment, meaning making AI systems more similar to us, because we cannot become more similar to AI systems. It takes hundreds of thousands of years to change, right? So those can be changed, they're engineering systems, right? So we need to, one of the ways to align their priorities with our priorities is to understand what our priorities are and to understand what the mechanisms of our mind are, and then potentially to create something that shares the values, that has the same like morals, the same principles, with whom we can talk, and that's why we need to understand the brain, I think. So,
There's a question here.
Hello. So a couple of thought patterns. You had mentioned computational hierarchy. So, and we have questioned consciousness. So my thought pattern is just like there is cells in your body that their life purpose is to come together and make you up. And they don't know that individually, but they all do it collectively, and you become their, for lack of a better term, their God. You're in control of them. And then just like that, we might be tiny little living things that make up something a lot bigger. And at the top of that hierarchy, we think we are the king of consciousness because we are in control of our own little living cells. So, and you had mentioned that energy is a physical form, and energy, the physics laws dictate once it expands to a new dimension, cannot go back to its old state. So now here we are with AI. AI is capable of a lot more comprehension than human brain is, simply because we can't use simultaneously 100% of our brain. So instead of aligning AI to our limitation, what area of study do I have to lean towards with all this thought pattern to expand, call it transhumanism if you will, to expand human brain capabilities, to be able to use your more than one part of your brain simultaneously to be able to access more information and then expand your understanding of this theater you're in, What area am I leaning towards? I'm in neuroscience and then somehow technology.
It's a very good question, and obviously there's a lot of thinking, like Neuralinks, for example, like Elon Musk's company a lot of other people are trying to develop brain implants which will ultimately enhance our brain. So, however, I should say that I don't think we have any hope because there is, I'm sorry to say, So our evolutionary time scale is about like 10,000 years. That's how we kind of double our computational capacity or change it noticeably. Whereas, there's Moore's law for computing systems that they double every 4 years or so, right? So those are like two exponentials which are not compatible. So I don't think like it will just patch. It will be a band-aid if we, implant ourselves with chips that enhance our memory, or if we use like 90% of our brain capacity versus 10, even beyond the point of argument whether we use 100% or 10, right? So I think the only way for us, like in the future, to survive is to actually move into computers. So that would be the way how our culture may actually, or our civilization can proceed forward. Either to robot
consciousness into a robot?
or to a computer. I don't know. There's a Star Trek episode about Professor Moriarty who was given like 15 terabytes of memory and he was happy. A big enough universe for him. It might be big enough for me. So.
Electrical stimulation, right? It's all electrical activity of the brain, electrical stimulation, and for that you don't necessarily need implants of chips. You can also do that biologically to further stimulate somehow, and down the evolution, now we can become one with human evolution, just like we have cell phones now, it's considered a part of human evolution. So I guess that's more bio now than AI, huh?
Well, it will be difficult again because there are two exponentials that are fighting. Our evolutionary time scale is very slow, unfortunately, and we're fighting against something that, outperforms us substantially. So I think that would be the way to go, is to basically understand what we are and to move into software.
In the film, they talk, there's quite a, especially at the end, there's quite a bit of talk about the ethics of this sort of stuff, about neuroscience, and you can't seem to have any conversation about AI without a discussion about the ethics of AI. When you're doing your work, how much thought do you have to do about what should be done and what could be done as opposed to what should be done?
Well, I'm thinking about it again. As I'm going to sound like a broken record. I'm trying to understand how our brain thinks and to make AI more similar to us, right? For example, to make it experience emotions or to behave in a way which is similar to our behavior, and that involves understanding our behavior, right? So, like one interesting example is that we were studying, I can give you like this funny example where we're trying to understand whether mice have theory of mind. So, the theory of mind is when, for example, right now I'm trying to understand how you view me. So I'm building a theory of your mind. But, so the question is if mice do that, when two mice interact, whether they look at another mouse and think, what does that mouse think about me? It's a good question, right? So, and then it's the first level of theory of mind. There is second level theory of mind is that the other mouse thinks of what I think of her. So that is like more sophisticated. So it turns out there is an evidence that mice actually use both when they interact. So, but to obtain this evidence, we had to build a model for theory of mind, of how animals or agents form a theory of mind. So now we can use the same theory and apply it to AI and potentially embed it into our AI. And wouldn't you want to talk to ChatGPT, which actually builds a model of you and tries to see how you view its responses, right? So that would be like one step towards making, it more humane, and that's what bothers me, in my research.
I think there's someone over here who's got his hand up. Yeah, you.
I'm sorry if it was very convoluted.
I think the biggest, one of the biggest gaps I see between a human brain and like a AI machine or language model is energy consumption. Like a human brain, I think, only utilizes something like 20 or 30 watts of energy, just enough to power a light bulb, versus most LLMs we see take much more than that. So do we ever see that, future AI models will consume much less energy and be able to, in that way, compete with humans? Or is that going to be a difficult bridge to go?
I mean, it is. I mean, I might argue with this postulate because if you compute the entire energy which was needed to evolve a language, like if you look at the entire energy consumption of the entire humans that were like from their birth 140 years ago, that energy consumption is actually similar to the one that goes into training a GPT model. So, but training a GPT model happens much faster. So, and then it's also true that if you ask ChatGPT a question, it will spit it out very quickly. It will spit it out way quicker than a human does. So the amount of energy that goes into that is also comparable to the amount of energy that will take me maybe 10 seconds to answer the same question, right? So those are compatible. It's just the ChatGPT, for example, it answers many questions to many people simultaneously, right? So that's why it consumes, kilowatts of energy. So I think the way we evolved is as a very slow moving objects, and the way ChatGPT is designed is very high bandwidth thing. So, but in terms of the overall energy consumption, there's no big discrepancy, I think.
We have someone right here in the middle. Yeah, maybe come around this way.
In the movie, they demonstrated the Hydra. They disassembled it, and it reassembled. It had to build the brain.
It had to what?
It had to build the brain.
Well, it doesn't have a brain.
It doesn't have a brain.
Distributed network.
So where's the intelligence? I mean, if it starts in a pool of cells,
yeah,
and then it completely reassembles to create the Hydra, where's the intelligence in that? It's not central to a brain.
But I don't think it has intelligence. But I might ask the same question. I understand your question. And
it could do a cartwheel.
There is another interesting animal which is called planarium. Planarium is a worm.
Michael Levine, right?
Yeah, which you can cut into many pieces, and it will regrow itself.
Right.
I think
it has a brain, right?
Yeah, that one has a ganglia, which is like assembly of neurons, which you could argue is a brain. And then what you can do, it has memory, so you can train it to do something. Like for example, you can familiarize it to some environment,
yeah, and
then you cut off its head, and it grows new head,
right,
and it still remembers.
Right. And you can even skip, right? You can skip generations.
Yes.
Right.
So
where's the intelligence? That's what
it's not intelligent. It's probably some biochemical trace of the former memory, but this is a fascinating question that I don't know. It's probably memory which is just contained in some, density of some peptides.
Is it an agency? Does it have an agent rather than saying a memory? Does it have a purpose? It has to get back to
I think planarium is closer to a robot, or it will just it has a hardwired behavior which is slightly modifiable, and if you when some behavior is important, it will fill its body with some molecules, and I mean that. But I'm fascinated by this question, but I don't think it's a good model for mind planarium. It's a good model for understanding how we can regenerate, because again, it has amazing capacity to grow its body, right, to reconstruct its body. So therefore, in the same way as Hydra does, right, so it can do it, which is completely fascinating. Yeah.
There's someone there in a red shirt, and then maybe we'll get back to someone who already asked a question as well.
Thank you. Assuming that the sense of self, or the awareness, the ability for us to understand and comprehend and act upon information is real, and not just an illusion. It's just something that feels real, though isn't. And you were then also talking about AI and how perhaps we might at one point in the future move into computers because of the work we're doing with AI. Is there, and I don't think there is, some litmus test for self-awareness that we can run against a person or a dog or a fish or a planaria, but also run against an AI system to know that if we do one day think we're moving into the AI, that it's still going to be us, because that sort of implies the existence of a soul, which I'm not big on, but I'm just wondering how that all works out.
It's a fascinating question, and it's kind of on the front end of this research, is whether you can have like a temperature like measure for intelligence, whether you can have a thermometer that you stick into like AI system and you know that it's intelligent or not, right?
Well, intelligence could be a number of things. I'm talking about self-awareness.
Or self-awareness. Sorry, yeah, I misunderstood you. Yeah, so, sorry, I misquoted you. So, yeah, so there is this, one of the researchers that they show, Christoph Koch, he participates in this project which develops something called integrated information theory of consciousness, which allows, it's a very complex measure, but it in principle allows to compute whether something is conscious or not. Or self-aware. So that is kind of on the front edge of the research, and it's like the quantity which is very difficult to compute at this point. But in principle, that could serve a measure. I think a fascinating project would be to take ChatGPT, for example, and apply that measure, this integrated information theory of consciousness to that network. And I think they should do it, to see maybe there is some, ghost in the machine. So that would be fascinating. But there are also other things which kind of approximate it. There are measures that I use to determine if there's a patient that is locked in, whether they're conscious or not. I mean, those are like practical things that people use in clinic. They would put somebody who undergone some injury, for example, or a stroke. They put them into fMRI magnet, and in many cases, they can determine whether they're conscious or not by running specific tests. Some of them, they argue they're similar to integrated information theory of consciousness, but
if you ran similar tests on a lower animal, a dog, a cat, a planaria,
right.
How would you know how to interpret those? How would you know how to interpret those signals as to whether or not they reflect consciousness or just brain activity? At what point do we make the differential between, it's just, it wants to move towards food, it wants to move towards light, versus it's thinking about how to solve a more difficult problem?
Well, integrated information theory of consciousness is very complicated, and like it's more rooted in some axioms that come in biology. I don't want to even like come close to it, but like one of the axioms is that it's like inseparable into parts. Like, for example, if you have, that's why the word integrated. For example, if you can have, so an example, suppose you have a person with split brain. Those people actually have two consciousnesses, which is remarkable. It was a discovery that got one of the neuroanatomists a Nobel Prize. So he developed a questionnaire or system of inquiry to figure out that those are different people. So they perceive the world differently. So that theory would, if you apply that measure to that person with split brain, it would return 0, unless you look at every particular part of the brain in isolation, right? So therefore, the idea is that our mind is united. So we have like one unified percept, like one unified qualia, or So that's one of the most important features of the mind, is that there's one unified percept, and that's why they argue that this is a good measure. But there's like a lot of papers written about it, and I recommend you, like practically speaking, there is a test that neurologists used, which is called, I think it's called house tennis test, where they ask a person who, for example, is not responsive they put them in the fMRI magnet and they say house. Imagine that you're in a house. And then they say, imagine that you're playing at tennis. And if the brain activity is different for those two, then there is a strong suspicion that this person is conscious. You know, but that's the practical test.
Okay. Thank you very much.
There's a question right there.
Sorry, this is not an AI question. I'm wondering about the work that's been done with the Hydra and regeneration, even what you were talking about, the worms, the starfish, things that regenerate, now worms regenerating brains. Any work being done on regeneration of damaged parts of the brain?
I mean, obviously, a lot of work done. Unfortunately, I'm not an expert in that field, but a lot of animals can regrow their parts, and a lot of animals can regrow their nerves, right? So I think there is a lot of work. I mean, which I could quote, but I'm not an expert. I'm not an expert in that. It's just understand why is it that our connections, our neural connections cannot regrow, but the frog's neural connections for some reason can regrow. You can like pull out a knife from a frog, put it back, and it will grow back.
Right.
So why is it we don't have this capability? So there are probably some like proteins, some guidance molecules which are different between us and like lower animals, and there's a lot of work done in that direction.
Okay.
There's someone right there, and there was someone here, and we have time for a couple more questions.
You mentioned that mice seem to be demonstrating first and second order theory of mind. Does that suggest that they have a sense of self?
I don't know. I mean, it's an ill-posed question, because how do I test it, right? So I think like a surrogate in neuroscience for this like self-awareness is decision-making, and mice can indeed make decisions, you know, which are kind of random, and they can make decisions which display some resemblance of free will. So this is the level to which we can test it experimentally, but indeed, this level of computation, we actually can find like brain regions where this theory of mind information is stored. So this level of computation is highly suggestive that it's you know, it does play a role in decision making, but we have no. It's only implicit evidence, right? It wouldn't stand in court.
There's someone over here that had a question. I'll ask one. I mean, people often, seems like people, at least when they talk about themselves or their minds, they're like wrestling with their own mind and often do things that are self-destructive to themselves. How is there, this question, how much control do we kind of see ourselves as the captains of our ship, you know, in control of everything. How much, do we have is there a sense of how much control we actually have over our own mind?
I mean, we are in control of our minds. Unfortunately, you know, it's it's driven by our genes as well, and you know, in many cases, these are self-destructive. You know.
It's on? Yeah, it's on.
Okay. Excuse me.
Definitely on.
Okay. The question I'd like to ask is, evolution has perhaps something to offer here. Obviously, evolution has created language, started out with calls. Animals make calls which encode some sort of information, and language is very different from that because it has grammar, extremely important, and enables us to say all sorts of strange things. Equally true, animals have a concept of number without having even a concept of arithmetic, let alone mathematics. There's an evolution there. And this seems really key. Mathematics is one of the key ways we understand the world around us. Language is one of the key things that we use to explain this and talk to other people. And just you're expounding your ideas to us right now, and Werner Herzog did it via the movie. Very interesting. But we don't seem to really understand how that happened. This seems to be a very new concept in evolution, although they knew baboons could count up to 4, I think, as early as 1920. But they're primates. But they found much more primitive animals show some kind of concept of number.
Like fish, for example. Yeah, fish can count to 5.
Right. So there's some very, very strange things there that we've dug out recently. And it seems like it might be pretty relevant to coming up with some concepts of consciousness, how it's arisen in the human brain. And I'm just wondering, has anybody done anything with this beyond my question here? And a very interesting movie, and I enjoyed listening to you very much. Thank you so much.
I think, like, I'm not really a big on evolution of consciousness. Well, I just have my thoughts about it, and I'm not really in the field of evolution of consciousness. There is a evolution of language, however, is absolutely fascinating, and if I have a joke to tell about it, it's a real story. It turns out that chimps can learn about 300 words, so you can teach them, communicate with you with cards. And the issue is that they cannot learn grammar, because 300-word dictionary apparently is not sufficient for grammar acquisition. So, and that's this kind of one of the stopping points for this like research in chimps. So one of the primate researchers had a baby, and with another primate researcher. And it was somewhere early in the 20th century. So they could actually take, and then there was a baby chimp. So they took the baby chimp and started raising it with their baby, which was possible in like 1930s. It wasn't frowned upon. And they were, at some point the chimp was actually building a better language skills. But then the chimp started like failing some language tests compared to the baby around like 1 year of age. And then they had to terminate the experiment, because what happened is that the baby started learning from the chimp the behavior and kind of the sound that the chimp was producing. So unfortunately, we don't know how this would end. But the idea is that we're actually more monkeys than monkeys themselves, right? So our brains are very flexible, and way more flexible than other primates. And in terms of acquisition of language, it's a fascinating question, because there's an argument that the language that we communicate with, I mean, it was produced by hunter-gatherers, maybe like the main features of the language like 100,000 years ago, and we didn't really need all that sophistication. We didn't need that grammar, because other animals, chimps, for example, they are capable of doing the same hunter-gathering without the sophisticated language. So why do we need to have all those, declinations, or why do we need the recursive structure?
Competition.
Excuse me?
Competition for food. I'm sorry. Competition for food, and a very stimulating environment which really compressed them and made them develop new modalities to get food, like the Ice Ages.
Right.
The Ice Ages that certainly had an influence on evolution, an enormous one.
Right.
And
that was a million years ago. Yeah.
But still, human beings are produced from those people. We're not that different. Cro-Magnon people are us. Neanderthal people, increasingly, we understand, really had complex behaviors. Before that, it's really obscure. That I certainly agree with.
Yeah.
But this gets to be a very interesting world. We're trying to figure things out. Looking back is very difficult.
Yeah. So like one theory says that there was a macromutation. There was like a major mutation that happened in our genome, and then suddenly we got all this capacity for, for having grammar and like speaking fluently. Well, I don't know how realistic it is, but maybe not us Neanderthals. There's evidence that Neanderthals had a language. So another possibility is language is just a runaway process, similar to like plumage on a bird. That doesn't really need that like colorful plumage, but it just uses it to attract other birds. Maybe language is something like that. But my argument is that like monkeys, other primates that don't have a language, they're probably better. They will survive longer in the like natural environment as hunter-gatherers than we do, right? But they don't. They also have communication, obviously, very sophisticated theory of mind, probably. So it's a fascinating subject. Language evolution is fascinating, and I don't think there are some resolved questions there.
Wow. All right, well, I think we're out of time. I want to thank all of you. I want to thank Alex for being here with us.